Okay, so now I want to go over pattern in our discussion of rhythm and pattern. So let's look at some slides. And you guys already have these slides. Um, they are the same set of slides as the rhythm. So the rhythm slides are first and then the pattern slides are next. Important here, all patterns contain rhythm through repetition, but not all rhythms are patterns, however. So if you remember when I talked about raindrops, that was rhythmic, but there was not exact patterns happening. And you guys are familiar with patterns, right? So we see it all over the place in decorative situations. And we think of patterns as cells. So it's the cell that is repeated, and it's exactly repeated. So it's not just characteristics of the elements that are repeated like we saw with rhythm. It is exact repetition of the cell. And we can make patterns out of basically anything. So these two together are not rhythmic, but when we combine them as separate and together cells, they become patterns. So if we see here, this is a pattern, and by being forced into a pattern, it then becomes rhythmic. And pattern makes rhythm out of anything, therefore. So the basic matrix of patterns is the square matrix, and everything else builds upon the square matrix. But you can see here, this is super basic. We've got four cells, they're in a square matrix, they're right next to each other. If we expand upon this, we can start twisting the cells next to each other and then repeating that twisted motif. And especially we get down into patterns like this, where there's flipping and then the inverting. So we've got playing with positive and negative space, the flipping of the entire thing, and then we've got some offsetting happening here. This one's pretty interesting too. So you can see how this is not as interesting, probably, as this one. So going beyond the basic square matrix is really key to building an interesting pattern. So we can start doing things like half dropping. So that means you've got this row here that is all in one orientation and is set like this. And then the next row is dropped down one like this. So we drop it down, so that's a half drop. Um, Bricking is layering on top of each other. Twisting, we mentioned that. And here's stacking and layering all happening together. And you can see this makes a really sort of variegated visual event now compared to something like this more basic pattern. Here are examples we see all over. So here's half dropping here. Here's twisting and flipping and mirroring happening here. So the diamond pattern is just the square at a diagonal, obviously. Same idea, same basic thing happening. Some flipping and mirroring again in the diamond pattern. Really complex layering and bricking, offsetting. This is a sort of organic derivation of the square pattern, the half dropping, the OG. And you can see for an OG to work, this curve right here has to be the exact same as the meeting curve up here, so that they all fit together in this cell matrix. Now, we can take it further. Here's six-sided original cell, and when that is put next to itself, we get these really interesting effects. This one maybe even more so. So I want to show you some examples of some student work and then show you a bit of what the assignment is. So this is all hand drawn, and so this is really awesome. Here's the original cell right here, and then this is repeated over and over again. This is interesting because you can see the original cell has these spots where the lines end on the sides of the cell. And so when they're put together in a half drop, these specific points are the same place on each side. So it will always line up with the next cell and make this kind of mountain range that is continuous. An OG. Here's a complex original cell that's then repeated. Again, this all done in marker. A cool one, really figured out geometrically, really measured out. This one, I really like how the negative space here is activated by shapes being built. And this is happening through some overlapping. So you can see all of this seems like it's just as important as all of the black space. There's that idea again of putting everything at specific places on the edges so it lines up with the next cell. And so this cell and this cell and this cell and this cell come together to make this interesting central object. Okay, so what you'll be doing is developing 3 designs. And these I hope you've saved the scraps from everything you've been cutting off. The easiest way to go about this is to put scraps together to make interesting shapes. So I really want this done with interesting shapes and not just basic shapes like squares and circles and rectangles. So you build up these objects and then you cut out multiples of each object. And each object then has its own color. And now in our case, we don't have colored paper this term, so I want you to do this with collage or painted paper. So each one of these sort of F shapes would be out of one type of paper. So either, magazines or a painted sheet of paper or whatever, just so that this shape is always associated with this material. Same with each of these. Then what you do is you start to play with how these could all be put together as an arrangement, as a new, larger, more complex object. Cat picture. So I started playing with how could these fit together to make something interesting, and I arrived at this. And so I glued everything together, and it doesn't take much glue, just apply very carefully. And then what I had to do is repeat this. And you're going to have to repeat this many, many times. And I believe I wrote in the instructions you have to have at least 6 of these large objects. I made a ton of them, tons of them. Then with my big sheet of paper, I gridded everything out. This photo is taken at an angle, so all of this is actually straight gridded. And the reason I gridded everything is so I could play with and perfect my positioning of all of the cells. And this is a little trick. Once you get positioning down, you make little marks where the corners are, so you know when you've got glue back on it, you can organize things and get them right back in the exact spot that you want. See, glue. And then I started to place them on the board. And you can see when you can see especially with the black shape, You see how all of this is overlapping? The black shape is underneath this one, it's over on this one, and then there's this meeting of the other edges, and it flips and comes back. Here's under, here's over, and so this repeats throughout the whole thing. Down here, it's flipped again, and then that'll go down this row. And then when I show you in the next video, I'll show you a lot of examples, and I'll show you the end result of this one.